You're listening to the Teach Better Talk podcast featuring expert educators eager to share progressive tactics to reach more students. Teach Better Talk is created by teachers and fueled by passion. Let's get started.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 272 of Teach Better Talk podcast. My name is Ray Hewart, and as always, I have the one, the only, Mr. Jeffrey Gargis is in the house. Jeff, you were out of town last week. We barely survived. I'm glad you're here. How are you?
Well, it's funny because you said I'm in the house. I'm like, actually, I'm not in my house. And then you said I was out of town last week, and I'm like, oh, I'm out of town right now, too. So I'm actually not at my house. We can tell
I know, but
the background is not as nice as yours. I'm in a hotel room because I'm traveling. So I was home for like a day and a half, and then I left again.
To confirm, though, you were on vacation with your beautiful family. Now you're on a trip because you're training with a school tomorrow with Chad.
Yeah, I traded in my beautiful family and my wife and kids for Chad. I mean, not exactly an even trade, but
we all make choices in life.
Yeah, so I'm in a hotel room on the road. Chad and I spend the next 2 days with a whole bunch of teachers from, I think, like 6 or 7 different districts. So pretty excited about that, you know?
I feel like that's how we're spending like all summer with all these webinars going on. I'm like sitting in a room with educators from like 7 or 8 different districts all talking shop, but you get to do it in person and other people get to do it virtually. Look at those options we're offering right there.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because you're doing that right now. You're literally in the middle of a 4-week, 8-session webinar on the grid method right now.
Well, yeah.
But like that's just the first of like 500 webinars we have going on, webinar series that we have going on this summer. So can we break down like?
Yeah, there's 6.
There's 506, whatever. Can we?
Well, but there's 6 open to the public. Like there's a ton of webinars we're doing, but 6 are like open to the public and not with the district specific. 6
that you right now listening, you can get into. So the one you're doing right now, obviously registration's already closed. You already started. That's on the grid method. But we've got another one on the grid method. It's another 4-week with 8 sessions. That's being run by Chad Ostrowski. That starts on July 12th. But in the middle there, we also have, you go right into another one on how to build the intro grid, which is a wildly requested training that we get all the time. It was, okay, I got the grid method now. I love it, but how do I actually start this thing? And that is a 2-week, 4-session. Break that one down for me. What does that one look like?
Well, it's really popular over the summer because educators are thinking about how to start their year off in August. And the reality is that if you run a mastery classroom where students are able to take ownership over their learning, you can't just like walk in and have that expectation. We need to teach our students how to be learners, how to be explorers. And so our intro grid allows teachers to not only come in and discuss that concept, but also build their own introduction grid so that they're able to have that resource when they start the year off. It's essentially your first unit that you would be doing within the first few days of your classroom. So I really like it. And we're actually doing 2 of those. So depending on what you're interested in and depending on what your summer looks like, we have an introduction webinar, intro grid webinar going on at the beginning of July. It overlaps with Chad's webinar that is also on the grid method, which is that deep dive. It's our workshop. You're building a grid with the man himself who created the grid method. We also, during that time, have the weighing in to earn buy-in, which is an incredible webinar that Caitlin and Dave are doing. And that's about bringing new concepts into your community and trying to share your ideas and create and foster solution-seeking discussions when you're trying to introduce different ideas to your colleagues and to your administration. So it's a really valuable session that's going on in July. And then right as kind of those end, we're going into another wave early August. We have another introduction grid webinar going on that I'm excited to facilitate. And then Dave has his standard-based grading training that's happening early August that's going to give educators a lot to chew on as they set up their classroom to kick off the year.
So that seems like a lot, Ray. And so that's like, what, like 15 different websites I probably have to go to find all this? Where's the best spot?
Okay. We'll make it easy. So I don't know if you guys like to explore, but if you want to make it easy, go to the homepage, teachbetter.com. Literally scroll down. It's the first thing. You can click on every single webinar and you can find the dates and who's the facilitator and everything in between. If you want to explore further, you could go to teachbetter.com/professional development. That really has everything and anything, but the homepage will get you what you need.
And the nice thing about all these webinars is that every session is recorded and then stored in an online course that you then have lifetime access to as part of your registration as well. So if you miss a session or you want to go back and listen through as you're going through the process again, or reflect on a piece, or need a refresher, whatever it might be, they're all recorded. So that's a nice little bonus.
Well, and they're not only recorded, but I really feel like this is important. They're recorded and they're uploaded within 24 hours.
Yes.
So if you're an educator in this webinar, you're not like missing sessions and then they're all uploaded at the end, similar to how we do some of our live series, because we do some of our social media posting that way. But for instance, today I did a webinar this morning with a group of educators. I had one educator that was missing because he was off on vacation. He emailed me today, not 2 hours later, being like, oh, I already see that it's uploaded in the academy. Like I don't have to miss class. I can still see what we worked on. Yeah. So it's really convenient. I love that.
Yes. So go over to teachbetter.com, get loaded up, go hang out with Ray this summer. It's a good call. So let's talk about this episode.
And Chad, and Caitlin, and
those
Dave,
other people too, but mainly else. Ray. Come on now. Great episode here. Marsha Tufft is I'm not going to ramble through all the stuff that she has, but I love how she breaks down what she refers herself as, but she's an engineer at heart. She's done a lot of incredible work in the engineering space. She's so passionate about STEM, and the work and problem solving really became the theme of this episode. And I think you're really going to enjoy how Marsha thinks about problem solving, and how she connected literally every single answer back to this idea of solving problems and learning from that. So great episode. Ray, anything to add, or should we just jump into it?
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. Episode 272 with Marsha Tufft. Hey, what's up, Teach Better family? It's Jeff, and I wanted to make sure that you were aware of all of the webinar series that we have going on this summer. Our summer webinars kick off with our first series, which is a 4-week, 8-session series with Ray, all about the grid method. Also this summer, we have a grid method webinar series with Chad Ostrowski, the creator of the grid method. We also have 2 webinar series with Ray, all about building that introductory grid to get things rolling in your classroom. We've got Dave Schmittou and Caitlin Giordano talking about how you can get important conversations going in your school building or district with our Weighing In to Get Buy-In series happening in July. And then wrapping things up in August, we have our standards-based grading webinar with Dave Schmittou. To get all the details and register, head over to teachbetter.com today. All right, we are here and we are chatting with Marsha Tufft. And Marsha, so awesome to have you on the podcast. Super excited to learn more about you and everything that you do. Before we dive too far into things, how are you feeling right now?
Pretty good. Having a lot of fun with some of my creative hobbies, and butterfly season hasn't quite started yet, but I've been doing some problem-solving tests on my latest quilt projects, and working on a few more STEM projects for an upcoming book.
Oh, awesome. Marsha, I hope that we dive into all these hobbies you have, because while I know you support educators in a multitude of ways, these other hobbies actually sound really cool too. So maybe you'll be able to fold those into some of our questions we have for you today. Before we get into all the nitty-gritty questions, I'd love to talk about you for a minute. I know that we learned about you in the introduction that Jeff and I were able to do, but will you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you describe what you do?
Well, I'm a professional engineer. So I'm a retired engineer, but I've got over 35 years work experience at GE Education and 3 degrees in engineering, bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Purdue University, master's in aerospace engineering from the University of Cincinnati, and a PhD in materials engineering from the University of Dayton. And one thing all engineers have in common is that we solve problems. And actually, one of the ways I managed to make it through my bachelor's in mechanical engineering was from all the hobbies I did as a kid. So I did a lot of sewing. I was interested in architecture. So my sister and I would design our dream house, and it always had an Olympic swimming pool in it, but we'd lay out to scale, kind of what the bedroom and the kitchen, all the main rooms would be in the flow. And we just had fun creating stuff. And when you have hobbies like that, first of all, you fail. They don't all go right. But you're motivated by things that interest you. So you figure out how to solve those problems. And when I got to sophomore year at Purdue University, I got my first D ever in physics, electricity and magnetism. And I was not a D student. But at that point, it's like I had to figure out, do I stay in engineering or do I quit and change majors? And, I'm not a quitter by nature, but my world was rocked when I got that D. And I had to figure out if I had what it took to continue in engineering. And what really was the deciding factor for me wasn't the awards that my high school physics project won, because that was one project. It was part of 1 year. It was all the creative stuff I'd done as a kid in elementary school and later that gave me the confidence to know that I was creative and I could figure things out. I figured I just had to learn a new medium. So that's kind of how I saw myself. And that's what gave me the courage to stay with it and persevere. Of course, then I still had to figure out, okay, I can't just keep doing the same things I always did. I had to figure out how to change so I could do better the next semester at school. And I sorted that out. I figured out that I had to take responsibility for my own learning. And I ended up switching into an independent studies section of the next EE 201 class, electricity and circuit analysis. And okay, so a lot of people didn't finish the independent study section of the course because they procrastinated too much. And I probably did the last half of the class in the last third or last quarter of the semester, but I finished it, I aced it, and that success set me up for the next 3 mechanical engineering controls classes that built on that same background. So I guess, one of the things I would describe myself as is a problem solver and somebody who knows how to learn and how to learn from solving problems.
So can you get into a little bit of your work that you've done with GE? Like how did you get into that, and what was that actual work? What do you actually do with GE and the education program there?
Okay, so for most of my 35 years, probably 22 years of that I was in critical rotating parts life management. So which was figuring out how things break, how to predict when they would break, and how to set safe operating limits for the critical rotating parts. But partway through there, I did my master's through the advanced course in engineering, which is a series of in-course in-plant classes taught by industry experts at GE and fuller part-time quarters at the University of Cincinnati. So you get your master's from a local university, but you're also you're solving problems that are directly related to aircraft engines. So I was an adjunct supervisor after I completed my master's through the advanced courses. And when the manager of technical education job came up, I applied for it and got it. So in my early 30s, I did a 3-year assignment managing GE's advanced course in engineering at the GE aviation site in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'd come to that from an adjunct position where we just surveyed the students, and they had lots of complaints about the instructors and the homeworks and, basically lots of problems with, they weren't happy with the curriculum as it was. And shortly after starting, I had the opportunity to take an instructor development workshop led by Glenn Markle and Ted Fowler from UC's Teachers College. It was a 32-hour workshop, plus then you had 3 or 4 teaching sessions where you were paired with an educational professional who would sit in on a teaching session and then give you feedback about how you were doing, how you were applying what you'd learned. And that gave me the insight to understand that the problem with the advanced courses, the instructors saw the students as being problems. They weren't motivated. They weren't learning. The students saw the instructors as not knowing how to teach and boring. And we were also getting to large class sizes of 50 to 60 students. And, that kind of changes the dynamic of what's going on in the class. And what I learned, the insight I had was our instructors didn't have effective educational methods. Once you get out of high school, you don't have to know how to teach in college. You just have to be a technical content expert. And teachers learn so many things that help them to be effective in the classroom. And our industry experts didn't have that. So one of my first tasks after taking the technical education role was persuading over half of our instructors to go through this instructor development curriculum. And the changes it made, it was night and day. I mean, before they would basically be doing lecture dump methods. So you'd be in a 4-hour class once a week, writing notes until your hands cramped. And then you had a homework assignment that was a long, in-depth problem that took about on the order of 40 hours to solve. And you got to work in teams, and you were often out of your comfort zone. But the feedback from the students was, gee, there's a lot of work and not a lot of payoff. And the classes don't always set you up for success in being able to handle the homework. And what the instructors were able to do as a result of that training was engage the students more during the lectures. So there was more efficient information processing during the class, and you actually felt like, okay, I've learned something, I can retain it, I understand how to apply it to the problem. And then we'd come back and we'd do a recap of the homework the following week to kind of close the loop on that whole situation. And along this process, I basically rediscovered my joy of learning. And then I went on after leaving that assignment. It was a tough decision for me whether to stay on the technical education side or go back into the engineering side. And I decided to go back to the engineering side, and I worked then started a PhD in materials engineering concurrently with going back to my old department, which included the critical rotating parts life management.
That's a really cool journey. I love how you utilize the conversations and the feedback from the students that were in there to help them take a look at and reflect on that program and adjust and improve it. So,
and I learned so much from that assignment. It really changed my life, getting insights into how people learn, how to motivate them. And then some of the stuff I did since with training dogs, it's like, okay, it all ties in. And some of the cool dog training I've been able to do after that. Clicker training wasn't a thing when I first started training dogs in like 1987. And in the early 90s, the local instructors weren't so great at teaching it, but around, I want to say 2008, I got to attend basically a week of seminars with Susan Garrett, who's one of the top dog trainers in the world and a world agility champion. And her method is it's a problem-solving cycle. So you define the problem, you figure out what you want to teach the dog to do. The dog has a choice. And this is the thing that differentiated her from everybody else, was this problem cycle that really step 2 is the dog has a choice. You set them up by framing a problem. For the dog, it's how do I earn the treat? For the handler, it's like, okay, the problem we're going to solve today, I want to teach him how to weave backwards figure eights between my legs. Okay, you got to break it down into tiny, tiny steps because you can't teach that in one session. But the dog learns the clicker game, which is, okay, what's going to earn me a click, which means I get a treat. And they just start offering behaviors until you find something that you can reinforce that gets you a tiny touch closer to your goal. They get a reward for that. That's the feedback that they're on the right track. And wrong is wonderful. So this is like me and my hobbies with sewing and other stuff. It's like, it's so much easier to learn to solve problems when you get immediate feedback. So in the dog training role, the facilitator is kind of setting the dog up for success, trying to keep them in the sweet spot for learning where it's challenging and they have to think through it, but it's easy enough that they can be successful and make positive progress. So when you set them up for this, eventually it's like weight training. You've got to increase the criteria, so that they're actually learning something. They're figuring out how to get closer to this ultimate goal, but you're breaking it down to chunks where they can be successful and they're getting enough feedback, positive feedback. They're being successful enough at the time that they can keep going and keep learning and keep refining. And
I love that.
That's in a nutshell how I solve problems. When it's my own hobby, then I'm close to the problem and it's like, okay, I know if I'm happy or not. I try something. Did this work? I have this goal with one of these quilts. I'm doing this Art Deco poster from a Monaco Grand Prix from like 1935. And I've been interpreting the elements of the poster in fabric and thread. And so I've solved one bit of a problem at a time, how to transfer the detail to the fabric, how to add the right amount of detail. And now I'm figuring out how I want to quilt it. And I was like, okay, I think I want to use this new technique, ruler quilting, but I got to learn this technique. So I got to solve some similar problems on smaller projects where I can learn those skills and figure out, is this going to do what I need it to do before I put it on this big, big project that I've spent tons of hours and years on, actually. So,
Marsha, I love you. I love how everything goes back to solving a problem, regardless of what you were talking about when you were talking about the education piece, into dog training, into the quilt, and it really does go back to what you originally said, which is you're a problem solver. So that gets me. I'm excited. I want to get into one of my favorite questions, which is around failure. So I'm excited to hear how you solve this problem and get through it. But can you share a story, a time with us, in particular time of a specific failure or challenge that you had to overcome, and kind of take us there with you? Tell us what happened. How did you solve that problem? How did you overcome it? And what did you pull away from that experience?
Well, I mentioned the bachelor's in mechanical engineering where I got a D in physics. So, and I can talk about a different example if you want, but
no, you go wherever you want to take us. We're with you.
Okay. Well, so I can do a parallel, maybe closer to some of your students, was the time I got a C in algebra in whatever 7th or 8th grade, and I was used to being good in math, and I couldn't get the word problems. And you kind of put it off. It's like, well, it's not really a problem. I'm getting through the test. And then you see that big C on the report card, and it's like, I'm maybe a B student. I'm mostly an A student, and you're afraid to ask for help. And when I got that C, I finally had to admit to myself, it's like, okay, I'm not getting this on my own. And it was scary for me. I wasn't used to having to go to the teacher and ask for help. And I finally got up the courage to say, okay, I need help. I'm not getting this. And so I went after school and I got help, and teachers are always so happy to help if you just ask. I don't know of a single teacher that would turn a student away and say, nope, sorry, tough luck. Figure it out on your own. But for me, the hard part was admitting to myself that I needed help and then going and asking for it. And it was all the word problems that I guess they still use, and where you got this paragraph and you have to read it and you got to figure out how to set it up and solve it. And I don't know if it took like a week where I had to go after school and I was working with the teacher until finally I started understanding and I started getting it. And once it clicked, it was a lot of fun. And that's the other thing I think kids don't really understand. Some it's real common to hear somebody say, well, if it were meant to be, it would be easy. And, I guess I'm just not cut out for it. And the truth is, we get bored by things that are too easy for us. And when you learn to do hard things, doing hard things becomes fun. And that's what solving the algebra word problems became to me. It's like once I got the hang of it, it was a ton of fun. And algebra really set me up for engineering. I mean, a lot of the equations we use, you're manipulating variables on different sides of the equations. And if you can do simple math, 3 times 4 equals 2 times 6, you can do the numbers. All you're doing with algebra is you're substituting the numbers with variables that represent something else. And you learn to manipulate them. You can solve tons of problems. And so I have lots of fun with my quilting hobby. I figure out how much yardage I need. I can figure out how wide the fabric is, how many strips of fabric I need, what my design, I kind of lay out my design and I figure out how much I need of each color. I design things like portable emerging cases for butterflies that I raise. I use algebra daily in my hobbies, and it just becomes this tool that's, as natural to me as reading. And that's the power of math. I think a lot of kids just don't understand how incredibly wonderful and powerful and magical math is. And they allow it to scare them. They don't get the help when they need to. And actually, I work with the Greater Cincinnati STEM Collaborative, and they surveyed students from Walnut Hills High School, which is like a college prep high school. And they were trying to start off this conversation about, well, do you see yourself in a STEM career? And these kids, all of them in this group, said no. And that was like a non-starter. They were thinking, what's going on here? I thought this was going to be an easy softball question just to get the conversation going. And it turned out those kids just didn't have confidence in their own math skills. So math is just incredibly important.
Yeah, Marsha, I couldn't agree more. As a educator with a math background, I couldn't agree more that the better we can support our students feeling confident in all the content that they're learning, math specifically, but truly any area that educators are able to work within to facilitate and foster deep thinking. We want our students to see success. And you did a great job earlier in an answer that you were sharing, focused on finding the balance between it being challenging, but also feeling success so that you can keep learning. And I thought that was such a wonderful area to remind all educators about it doesn't need to be easy and it can't be too difficult. You got to find that sweet spot. So when it comes to the work you're doing and your continued focus, I thought this was so cool in all your answers thus far, this awesome focus of problem solving, which is truly something that I see in classrooms, but I don't get to see it enough. And I think it's beautiful that you've put so much of a focus on not only supporting teachers in this area, but getting that type of activity, those types of learning opportunities in our students' hands. Can you tell me a piece of advice that you would want to give to teachers? I know it's tricky to pick one. I know it's almost an impossible question to ask. But if you had to pick one piece of advice that you want all of our listeners to really consider, what would be your suggestion?
I think in this case, it would be focus on the progress. So not just grading, the outcome, so the destination, did they solve the problem? But what about the effort putting in? How are they learning? Are they starting to understand? Because the thing is, when I think about problem solving, and Girl Scouts have asked me, I've been trying to help them with their Think Like an Engineer badges, and a lot of leaders don't feel comfortable leading the badges because they're solving some complex problems, and they don't want to set the girls up for success. And I think with a problem-solving approach, that it's more important to figure out how you can help lift the students' self-image of themselves to recognize, hey, you put a lot of effort in this and you learned something. So focus on the journey and the learning process, and not so much, did they build the perfect project, but what did they learn? Not necessarily was it, a competitive A or B, because everybody's at a little bit different level. And sometimes it's hard to deliver grades and evaluate everybody on the same playing field. But to try to inspire and reinforce those problem-solving achievements in each student, regardless of how polished their final effort was, and to help lift them up and get them to recognize that, hey, they may not have ended up where they thought they were going to go, but they learned something pretty amazing along the way. And the more that they solve problems, the better they're going to become at it.
I love that. I love the focus on the journey, the learning. What did they actually grow and learn? And then how you can wrap it up with, and are they learning that problem solving is going to help them and continue to help them learn and grow? Loving it. We're going to keep it going here. We're going to kind of put you to the test here. So the next 6 questions, Marsha, I'm going to throw these at you. Your goal is to answer each one of them in less than 15 seconds. Are you ready for this?
Sure.
All right. What is one tech tool that you cannot live without?
Okay, so my background is engineering and not teaching, but I guess if I had to name one, I'd say Zoom, because I use that for a lot of video communications and for recording some of the videos that I do on my website.
What's a good book you're reading right now?
I've been enjoying Trials of Apollo by Rick Riordan. I mean, it's just a fun book, and I love the character growth that Apollo goes through. And another is Talent is Overrated by Jeff Colvin.
Who do we need to follow on Twitter or Instagram today?
Well, Chris Woods is amazing. He's got a website, dailystem.com, and he hosts the STEM Everyday podcast. And he's one of the most active people on Twitter that I know. And he's got such a passion for bringing STEM into the classroom in a practical way.
What's a good YouTube channel, website, or podcast that educators should check out?
Well, I love Solve It for Kids podcast because the topics are really focused on kids, and they've got a fun challenge with each podcast, so that if you've got a kid, you want to expose them to more STEM content, it's really kid focused. And then Chris Woods, another one of my favorites, his is really more geared towards adults. So those are 2 great podcasts that are favorites.
Give us a daily, weekly, or monthly routine every teacher should get into.
I would say find ways to show the relevance of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math in real life. One of the things I learned from the technical education role is that motivation is closely linked to success in learning. The relationship goes both ways. So teachers who plan successful experiences for their students were also able to build motivation. And that motivation has 2 dimensions: perceived value or relevance, and expectation for success. So if you want to build the motivation students to become successful, then show them the relevance of what they're learning. And, and help them succeed, structure it to help them become successful with it.
I love it. And what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I'd have to say it's some feedback I got while a summer engineer working at Procter & Gamble. And it was about receiving feedback and understanding others' points of view. That there's no single reality, and that so P&G had one of the most balanced performance appraisal processes I've ever seen. So for everybody from the the summer engineer to the plant manager, they would list 3 relative strengths and 3 relative weaknesses. And you can usually maximize your potential to focus on your relative weaknesses rather than making your strengths stronger. But one of my weaknesses in that performance review was a presentation I gave to the plant manager where I was presenting the results of my project, and I was perceived as defensive. That wasn't how I felt. I felt excited, prepared. I was eager to jump in on the questions. I think I actually was cutting some of the questions off. That's how eager I was to answer. And my manager had to catch me in the act as I was responding to his comments in the performance appraisal. Marsha, you're doing it now, before I understood, oh, this is the behavior. I'm feeling excited and motivated and eager, and it was being perceived as defensive. That was when the light bulb really came on, that I understood, oh, things that I do can be totally misconstrued or come across in a totally different way. And it's hard to ask for feedback. And sometimes it's hard to listen to the feedback, but that's where you get the greatest growth, is asking, being open to feedback, processing it, and then taking action on it. And it can make a huge difference in your world. You can learn so much.
Great piece of advice, Marsha. I have loved hearing all these answers, so focused on being good problem solvers and really doing what we need to do to support students in areas of feeling success. I found that theme so consistent. I think that it's something that will resonate with all of our listeners, and I really want to make sure that they stay connected to you. I know that you have a website and a Twitter handle and a YouTube channel and a few books. Would you mind sharing the places that we can stay connected to you? And then obviously these resources will also be in the show notes for our listeners to go and engage with.
Sure. My website is putneydesigns.com. And on it, there's a STEM menu where I've got a lot of my STEM projects. On the About page, you'll find more information about how to connect, where my YouTube channel is. Under the Books menu, you'll see information about my 3 books. It's Putney and the Magic iPad series. It's got a STEAM theme: science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And she solves a lot of problems, and she's got a magical mentor in the form of a magic iPad that kind of helps her sort through her journey. You can also get me I'm on Instagram under MK Tufft. Twitter, I'm not real active on Twitter, but it's Marsha Tufft is the one I use most. My Facebook author page is MK Tufft. So those are, and I have a newsletter you can subscribe to on my website. And you can also, if you scroll down to the bottom of any page, there's a contact us area where you can put in your name and email address and a message, and that comes to me, and I read every email. So if you've got any suggestions for projects or things that you would like to see, I would love to hear from you.
I love it. You can find all the links and all the resources and everything we mentioned in this episode over at teachbetter.com, as well as the really important links for connecting with Marsha and keeping this conversation going. So make sure you head over to teachbetter.com for all of that. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. And if you can give us a rating and a review, we'd really appreciate that as well. Let's keep taking this one step further. Think of just 3 of your colleagues who need to hear these amazing stories and connect with these amazing people, and just share this podcast with them. Marsha, thank you so much for coming on. I love hearing your story and the way you think about things and the passion you have for everything you do and what you're trying to share with people. And just really appreciate you taking some time and sharing your story and your passion with us. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed being on your podcast.
Until next time, let's get out there and let's teach better.